class passengers only. Please step back.
The announcement echoed through JFK Terminal 7 as snow continued to fall outside the massive windows. Christmas night had turned into a travel nightmare. 3 hours of delays, overbooked flights, and thousands of stranded passengers filled every corner of the terminal with frustration and exhaustion. Gate 47 buzzed with activity as British Airways Flight 185 finally prepared for boarding. The red-eye to London was supposed to depart at 8:30 p.m. Now, approaching midnight, passengers clutched their boarding passes like lifelines. Ladies and gentlemen, we sincerely apologize for the delay announced. The gate agent, her voice strained from repeating the same message for hours. Weather conditions have improved, and we're ready to begin boarding our Christmas night service to London Heathrow. We'll start with first class, followed by business, and then economy by zones. The first-class lounge had been a sanctuary of calm compared to the chaos outside. Leather chairs, complimentary champagne, and the soft hum of quiet conversations. But even here, tension crackled in the air. Holiday travel brought out the worst in people, and Christmas night was particularly brutal. Through the floor-to-ceiling windows, the tarmac glittered with ice. De-icing trucks worked methodically around the British Airways 777, their orange lights cutting through the darkness. Snow fell in thick flakes, creating a winter wonderland that was beautiful to look at but hell to fly through. All first-class passengers welcome aboard called Sophia Ramirez, adjusting her British Airways scarf as she prepared to greet the premium cabin guests. At 28, Sophia was relatively new to the first-class service, having been promoted just 6 months earlier. Tonight felt different. The delayed departure, the holiday stress, the demanding passengers she'd already dealt with in the lounge. Her colleague, Jessica Collins, stood beside her tablet in hand. At 24, Jessica was even newer to the job, and the pressure showed on her face. "I've never seen the first-class passengers." "This agitated?" she whispered to Sophia. "Mrs. Montgomery has already complained twice about the champagne temperature, and we haven't even boarded." "It's Christmas night," Sophia replied, forcing a smile. "Everyone's trying to get home or away for the holidays. Just remember our training. Kill them with kindness, no matter what." The jet bridge extended like a mechanical arm reaching for the aircraft door. Inside the plane, the first-class cabin gleamed under soft LED lighting. 14 seats in a 1-2-1 configuration, each a mini sanctuary of leather and technology. The air smelled of fresh orchids and the faint scent of expensive cleaning products. Outside, the boarding area erupted in controlled chaos. First-class passengers lined up with their distinctive burgundy priority tags. Many clutching phones and tablets, their faces illuminated by screens showing weather updates and connection information. "Merry Christmas Eve. Welcome aboard Flight 185. Sophia greeted each passenger as they entered the aircraft. Her smile was genuine despite the long day. She'd grown up in Queens, the daughter of immigrants who cleaned office buildings at night so their children could have better opportunities. This job meant everything to her family. Jessica checked boarding passes and directed passengers to their seats. 2A, right this way. Can I take your coat? The first passengers filed in slowly. A businessman from investment banking already on his phone discussing market closures. An elderly couple celebrating their 50th anniversary with a London vacation. A tech executive who looked like he hadn't slept in days. Then she walked on. Even at midnight on Christmas, after hours of delays and frustration, Victoria Ashford made an entrance. At 42, she possessed the kind of beauty that money could buy and maintain. Platinum blonde hair fell in perfect waves past her shoulders. Her emerald silk dress hugged her curves in all the right places, expensive enough to feed a family for months. Diamond earrings caught the cabin light, and her Hermes bag probably cost more than most people's cars. But it wasn't her appearance that filled the space. It was her attitude. The way she looked around the first-class cabin like she was inspecting a hotel room she might reject. The way she handed her coat to Jessica without acknowledging her as a human being. the way her eyes swept over the other passengers with the cool calculation of someone determining their net worth. "Seat 2A," Victoria announced, rather than asked, her voice carrying the authority of someone used to being obeyed. "I specifically requested this seat when I boarded. I hope there haven't been any changes." "Of course, Mrs. Ashford," Sophia confirmed, checking her tablet. "2A is confirmed. Can I get you a welcome drink, Krug Grande Cuvée, if you have it? If not, I suppose Dom Perignon will suffice." Victoria settled into her seat like a queen claiming her throne. "And I'll need extra pillows. The ones you provide are barely adequate." Jessica scurried away to fulfill the requests while Sophia continued greeting passengers. The cabin was filling up, but slowly. Holiday travel meant lots of last-minute changes, upgrades, and special requests. Through the oval windows, the snow continued to fall. Ground crews worked tirelessly to keep the runways clear, but Mother Nature seemed determined to make Christmas travel as difficult as possible. The captain's voice crackled over the intercom. "Ladies and gentlemen, this is Captain Morrison from the flight deck. We're continuing to board passengers and should be ready for pushback within the hour. London weather is looking good, so once we get airborne, it should be smooth sailing. We appreciate your patience on this Christmas evening." Victoria barely looked up from her phone, where she was typing furiously. Her manicured nails clicked against the screen with the rapid-fire precision of someone used to getting immediate responses to her demands. "Excuse me," she called to Sophia, who was helping another passenger. "My champagne." "Coming right up, Mrs. Ashford." The boarding continued. Business class filled with holiday travelers, families headed to London for New Year's Eve, business people trying to beat the post-Christmas rush. The energy in the aircraft was strange. Part excitement for Christmas adventures, part exhaustion from travel delays, part anxiety about weather and connections. Outside, the snow was getting heavier. The de-icing trucks made another pass around the aircraft, their chemicals creating steam in the cold air. Inside the terminal, announcements echoed about further delays and cancellations. Flight 185 was one of the lucky ones still scheduled to depart. Victoria had finished her champagne and was already requesting a second glass. Her phone calls had grown louder, and other first-class passengers were starting to notice. Something about Christmas shopping receipts, tax deductions, and making sure the accountant handles everything properly. "I don't care if it's Christmas, Victoria," said into her phone, her voice carrying across the cabin. "Some things are more important than holidays. Handle it." She hung up with the aggressive tap of someone accustomed to having the last word in every conversation. Around her, the first-class cabin continued to fill with passengers settling in for the overnight flight. But somehow Victoria Ashford had already managed to make the space feel smaller, more tense, as if her presence alone could change the atmosphere. The boarding was nearly complete, but one seat remained empty. Seat 2B, directly across the aisle from Victoria Ashford. The gate agent had mentioned a last-minute passenger, someone who'd been rebooked from an earlier canceled flight. Outside, the snow continued to fall on Christmas night, beautiful and treacherous, setting the stage for a flight that would become international news. The last passenger to board Flight 185 didn't look like he belonged in first class, at least not to anyone judging by appearances alone. Damon Rivers walked down the jet bridge with the unhurried confidence of a man who'd learned that quiet dignity carried more weight than flashy displays of wealth. At 35, Damon stood 6 feet tall with the lean build of someone who ran every morning, rain or shine. His dark skin had a healthy glow despite the long day, and his close-cropped hair was beginning to show just a hint of gray at the temples. Tonight he wore dark jeans, a navy wool sweater, and a leather jacket that had seen years of use but remained stylish. No designer labels, no expensive watch. Nothing that screamed success. But anyone who looked closely might notice the details. The way he carried himself with absolute certainty. The quality of his leather briefcase, worn but well made. The way his eyes took in everything around him, missing nothing, evaluating everything. These were the habits of a man who'd spent years in courtrooms where every detail mattered. "Welcome aboard." Sophia greeted him with a genuine smile. After dealing with demanding passengers all evening, his quiet presence felt refreshing. "Thank you, Damon," replied his voice, warm and cultured. "I appreciate you getting me on this flight. I know it was last minute." "No problem at all. You're in 2B right across there." Sophia gestured to the seat directly across from Victoria Ashford, who looked up from her phone with the expression of someone who'd just detected an unpleasant smell. Damon nodded and made his way to his seat. He placed his briefcase in the overhead compartment with careful precision, then settled into 2B. The leather was soft, the legroom generous. After 3 hours in the airport, any seat would have been welcome, but first class was definitely better than economy. He pulled out his tablet and immediately opened a folder labeled Ashford Technologies, Discrimination Case. The screen filled with legal documents, depositions, and email evidence. Christmas might be a time for family and celebration, but justice didn't take holidays. Tomorrow's emergency court session in London could change hundreds of lives. Across the aisle, Victoria Ashford studied the new passenger with the subtle intensity of a socialite conducting reconnaissance. Her gaze swept from his casual clothes to his worn leather briefcase to his lack of obvious luxury accessories. Her nose wrinkled slightly as if she'd detected something distasteful. "Excuse me," Victoria said to Jessica, who was passing by with warm towels for the first-class passengers. "I think there might be a mistake with seating assignments." Jessica paused, her smile faltering slightly. "I'm sorry, ma'am. The gentleman across from me." "Are you certain he's supposed to be in first class?" Victoria's voice carried just enough volume that several nearby passengers could hear. "I mean, I'm sure he's very nice, but this cabin has a certain atmosphere." Damon looked up from his tablet. Their eyes met across the narrow aisle. Victoria's gaze was cold, calculating, full of assumptions. Damon's was steady, patient, and completely unimpressed. "Is there a problem?" Damon asked quietly, his tone neutral but firm. Victoria's smile was razor-sharp. "Oh, no problem at all. I was just making sure everyone was in their proper seat. Sometimes there are mix-ups, you know. People upgrade without realizing the expectations." "I see." Damon's voice remained level. "And what expectations would those be?" Before Victoria could respond, Jessica intervened nervously. "Mr. Rivers, your seat is definitely correct. 2B first class. Can I get you anything to drink?" "Coffee black, please." Damon returned his attention to his tablet, dismissing Victoria with the kind of polite indifference that somehow felt more cutting than any insult. Victoria's cheeks flushed pink. She wasn't used to being dismissed, especially not by someone she'd clearly categorized as beneath her social status. Her husband, Richard Ashford, was CEO of one of the fastest-growing tech companies on the East Coast. They moved in circles where everyone knew everyone, where net worth was discussed as casually as the weather. Jessica Victoria called, her voice slightly sharper than before. "I'd like another champagne. The Krug, not the Dom Perignon." While Jessica hurried to fulfill the request, other passengers were settling in for the long flight. In seat 3A, Michael Torres was setting up his camera equipment. At 31, the Hispanic filmmaker from Los Angeles was documenting his Christmas trip to London, planning to create content about holiday travel in Europe. "Testing, testing," Michael whispered into his camera. "Day 1 of my London Christmas adventure. Currently on British Airways Flight 1985 Christmas night red-eye. The weather's been crazy, but we're finally boarding. First class looks pretty nice, though. There seems to be some tension already." He panned his camera discreetly around the cabin, capturing the holiday decorations, the elegant seating, and inadvertently recording Victoria's increasingly agitated conversation with the flight attendants. 2 rows back, Emma Richardson was setting up her own recording equipment. At 26, the travel blogger from Atlanta had built a successful YouTube channel around luxury travel experiences. Her Christmas Eve livestream was supposed to showcase British Airways' premium service, but the delayed departure had turned into an opportunity to capture real travel drama. "Hey, travel fam," Emma whispered into her phone, which was propped up to show both her face and the cabin behind her. "Emma here. And wow, what a night. We're finally boarding after hours of delays, and let me tell you, the holiday travel struggle is real. But we're in first class on British Airways, so I'm not complaining too much." Her live stream chat was already filling with comments from viewers tuning in on Christmas Eve, many of them dealing with their own travel nightmares or living vicariously through her luxury experience. In the window seat next to the aisle, David Kim was scrolling through news feeds on his laptop. The 29-year-old Korean-American software engineer worked for a tech company in Seattle and was heading to London for a New Year's vacation. But something about the conversation he'd overheard was nagging at him. The name Ashford sounded familiar, connected to something he'd read recently about tech industry scandals. Meanwhile, Damon continued reading through case files, completely absorbed in his work. The lawsuit against Ashford Technologies had consumed his life for the past 18 months. What started as a single complaint from his sister about workplace discrimination had expanded into a class action case representing over 200 current and former employees. The evidence was overwhelming. Internal emails joking about diversity hires, performance reviews that praised minority employees' work but still rated them below promotion thresholds, meeting recordings where executives discussed keeping the company's culture intact, a pattern of bias so clear that even Ashford's own lawyers were advising settlement. But Richard Ashford had refused every offer, confident that his money and connections could outlast any legal challenge. He'd hired the most expensive law firm in New York, filed countless motions to delay and dismiss, and used every legal maneuver available to avoid accountability. What Ashford didn't know was that Damon Rivers had built his reputation on cases just like this. Civil rights law wasn't just his profession, it was his calling. Growing up in Detroit, he'd watched his parents face discrimination in employment, housing, and education. He'd promised himself that when he became a lawyer, he'd make sure others didn't have to endure the same injustices. The case against Ashford Technologies was personal in ways that Damon kept private. His sister Keisha had been one of the company's top software engineers, recruited directly from MIT, with promises of career advancement and innovative projects. Instead, she'd been assigned to administrative tasks, passed over for promotions, and eventually pushed out entirely after complaining about workplace bias. The settlement Damon was seeking wasn't just about money. It was about accountability change and sending a message that even the richest tech bros couldn't buy their way out of justice. Victoria finished her second champagne and was already gesturing for a third. Her phone rang and she answered with the imperious tone of someone important. "Richard." "Yes, I'm finally on the plane. The delays were absolutely ridiculous." "What do you mean, emergency board meeting?" "It's Christmas." "Well, handle it. I'm not dealing with business drama while I'm trying to relax." She hung up with obvious irritation, then noticed Damon watching her. "Something interesting?" she asked coldly. "Just wondering if you always conduct business so publicly?" Damon replied mildly. "Some conversations are better kept private. I don't need advice about discretion from—" Victoria paused, her eyes raking over his appearance once more. "From someone who doesn't understand how real business works." Damon smiled slightly. It was the expression of a poker player holding 4 aces while his opponent complained about their hand. "You'd be surprised what I understand about business, Mrs. Ashford." "Victoria Ashford." She pronounced the name like it should mean something to him. Ashford Damon repeated thoughtfully. "Interesting name. I've been hearing it a lot lately." Victoria's expression sharpened. Something in his tone suggested this wasn't casual conversation. But before she could respond, Captain Morrison's voice filled the cabin. "Ladies and gentlemen, we've received clearance for pushback. Flight attendants, please prepare the cabin for departure. We're finally on our way to London." As the aircraft began to move away from the gate, none of the first-class passengers realized they were about to become part of a story that would dominate international headlines for weeks. The plane pushed back into the snowy Christmas night, carrying with it a collision of personalities, principles, and pride that would play out at 35,000 feet. The stage was set for a confrontation that would expose the ugly reality of modern racism and prove that justice, like flights, sometimes arrives exactly when it's needed most. The aircraft taxied slowly through the snow, joining a line of planes waiting for takeoff clearance. Inside the first-class cabin, the subtle dance of air travel etiquette was already breaking down. Victoria Ashford had consumed 3 champagnes in less than 30 minutes, and her inhibitions were dissolving along with her facade of polite society. Jessica Victoria called out, snapping her manicured fingers like summoning a servant. "This champagne is getting warm. Bring me a fresh glass and make sure it's properly chilled this time." Jessica Collins hurried over with a new flute of Krug, her hands slightly trembling. The young flight attendant had dreamed of working international routes, but dealing with entitled passengers wasn't part of her romantic vision of airline service. "Here you are, Mrs. Ashford. Is there anything else I can get you?" "Actually, yes." Victoria's voice carried across the cabin louder than necessary. "I'm concerned about the seating arrangement. I specifically booked first class to avoid certain elements. I don't feel comfortable with the current configuration." Sophia Ramirez, who had been helping passengers stow last-minute items, paused mid-conversation. She'd worked enough flights to recognize the coded language, the careful phrasing that danced around direct accusations. Her stomach tightened with familiar dread. Damon Rivers looked up from his legal files, his expression unchanged, but his attention now fully focused on the conversation across the aisle. He'd heard this song before in boardrooms and courtrooms, restaurants and hotels, the careful, pseudo-polite way that some people expressed their discomfort with sharing space with black faces. "I'm not sure I understand, Mrs. Ashford," Sophia replied carefully. "Is there something specific about your seat that's not satisfactory?" Victoria gestured vaguely toward Damon without quite looking at him directly. "I just think there might be passengers who would be more comfortable in other sections of the aircraft. It's nothing personal, you understand. It's about maintaining the proper atmosphere." The cabin went quiet, except for the steady hum of the engines. Several passengers looked up from their phones and tablets, sensing the tension, but not quite understanding its source. Michael Torres discreetly adjusted his camera angle, sensing that his travel documentation might be capturing something more significant than holiday footage. Emma Richardson's live stream chat was exploding with comments from viewers who were picking up on the subtext of Victoria's complaints. Her follower count was climbing as people shared the stream, sensing drama unfolding in real time. "Proper atmosphere," Damon repeated quietly, his voice carrying just far enough that Victoria could hear him. "Interesting phrase. What exactly would constitute an improper atmosphere?" Mrs. Ashford, Victoria's cheeks flushed, whether from alcohol or anger, wasn't clear. "I don't think I need to explain my concerns to other passengers. This is a matter for the flight crew." "Actually," Sophia interjected diplomatically, "all our passengers have been properly screened and ticketed. Everyone in first class is exactly where they're supposed to be." "I find that very hard to believe," Victoria said, her voice getting sharper. "When I pay for first class, I expect a certain standard. I expect to travel with people who understand proper behavior, who belong in these seats." David Kim looked up from his laptop, his expression darkening as he processed what he was hearing. As a Korean American who'd faced his own share of subtle racism in the tech industry, he recognized the playbook. The careful language, the appeals to standards and atmosphere, the way certain people could make their bigotry sound like quality control. Ma'am, David said quietly, "I think everyone here belongs exactly where they are." Victoria whirled to face him, her composure cracking further. "I wasn't talking to you. This is none of your business." "Actually, it kind of is my business," David replied, his voice steady but firm. We're all sharing this cabin. We all paid for our seats. And frankly, the only person disturbing the atmosphere right now is you. How dare you? Victoria's voice rose to near shouting levels. Do you have any idea who I am? Who my husband is? I will not be spoken to this way by... She gestured wildly at David and Damon, her hand shaking with rage and alcohol, clearly searching for words that wouldn't get her in immediate trouble, but would still convey her racial animus. By what Damon asked quietly, setting down his tablet and giving Victoria his full attention. By passengers who paid for their seats. By people who have every right to be here, or by people whose skin color makes you uncomfortable. The directness of his question hit the cabin like a thunderclap. There was no more dancing around the subtext, no more coded language. Damon had called out exactly what everyone was thinking but hadn't wanted to say out loud. Victoria's mouth opened and closed like a fish gasping for air. She looked around the cabin for support for allies who would validate her position. But the other passengers were staring at her with expressions ranging from embarrassment to disgust. I never said anything about... Victoria stammered, clearly flustered by having her racism exposed so directly. You didn't have to say it, Damon replied calmly. It's been clear from the moment I sat down. The way you looked at me, the comments about proper seating, the concerns about atmosphere. You're not the first person to use polite language to express ugly thoughts. Sophia stood frozen between the seats, unsure how to handle a situation that was spiraling beyond her training manual. She'd dealt with drunk passengers, medical emergencies, and unruly children, but open racial tension in first class was uncharted territory. Emma's live stream chat was going crazy. Comments were flying by too fast to read, but the general sentiment was clear. Viewers were horrified by Victoria's behavior and impressed by Damon's calm responses. Someone had already screen recorded the exchange and was sharing it across social media platforms. Michael Torres had discreetly started recording video, his filmmaker instincts telling him this was becoming something significant. He'd covered social justice issues before, but never from inside an airplane cabin at 35,000 feet. I think Victoria said, struggling to regain her composure, that this conversation is completely inappropriate. I'm a paying customer, and I have the right to travel in comfort without being harassed by other passengers. Harassed. David Kim laughed bitterly. Lady, you've been harassing everyone since you got on this plane. You've been rude to the flight attendants, you've made racist comments about seating, and now you're playing the victim because someone called you out on your behavior. Victoria turned to Sophia with desperate authority. I want him moved. Both of them. I will not tolerate this treatment. My husband is a very important businessman, and when he hears about this... Your husband, Damon, said slowly, as if tasting the words. Richard Ashford, right, CEO of Ashford Technologies. Victoria's expression changed instantly. The mention of her husband's name seemed to sober her slightly, as if she suddenly remembered that her behavior might have consequences beyond this airplane cabin. How do you know my husband's name? She asked warily. Damon smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. Let's just say it's been coming up a lot in my work recently. Small world, isn't it? Something in his tone made Victoria's skin crawl. There was knowledge behind his words, a suggestion of familiarity with her husband's business that she couldn't quite place, but alcohol and entitlement overrode her caution. My husband is a very successful man, she said defensively. He has nothing to do with whatever this is. Doesn't he? Damon asked quietly. Because from what I understand, your husband has very strong opinions about who belongs where, about maintaining certain standards and atmospheres, about keeping the right kind of people in the right kind of positions. The color drained from Victoria's face. Something in Damon's words and the specificity of his language triggered alarm bells that even champagne couldn't silence. But pride and prejudice are powerful drugs, and Victoria Ashford had been high on both for most of her adult life. I don't know what you're implying, she said coldly, "but I won't be threatened by some random passenger who doesn't know his place." The words hung in the air like smoke, toxic and impossible to take back. Every passenger in first class had heard them. The live stream viewers had heard them. The cameras had captured them. And Damon Rivers, civil rights attorney and lead counsel in a $50 million discrimination lawsuit against Ashford Technologies, filed them away as evidence of exactly the kind of mentality his case was designed to expose. "My place," Damon repeated softly. "Interesting choice of words, Mrs. Ashford. Very interesting indeed." Captain Morrison's voice crackled over the intercom as Flight 185 finally received clearance for takeoff. "Ladies and gentlemen, we're next in line for departure. Flight attendants, please take your seats for takeoff." Sophia and Jessica quickly secured the cabin and strapped themselves into their jump seats, both grateful for a temporary respite from the brewing tension. As the Boeing 777 accelerated down the runway, the lights of New York disappeared beneath a blanket of snow, and the aircraft climbed into the dark Christmas sky. But inside the first-class cabin, the real drama was just beginning. As the seatbelt sign turned off and passengers were free to move about the cabin, Damon Rivers opened his briefcase and spread several files across his tray table. The documents bore the letterhead of Rivers and Associates and case numbers that would soon become infamous in legal circles. Victoria Ashford tried to peer across the aisle at his paperwork, her alcohol-fueled curiosity overriding any sense of discretion. She could make out fragments of text: Ashford Technologies, discrimination complaint, class action lawsuit. But the full significance didn't quite penetrate her champagne-clouded mind. "More business documents?" Victoria asked, with false sweetness. "I hope you're not one of those people who works the entire flight. It's Christmas Eve, after all." Damon looked up from a deposition transcript, studying Victoria's face carefully. "Some work can't wait for holidays, Mrs. Ashford. When justice is delayed, it's often justice denied." He turned a page in the file, revealing an internal email from Ashford Technologies. Even from across the aisle, Victoria could see her husband's name in the header. Her blood alcohol level might have been elevated, but her survival instincts were beginning to kick in. "What kind of work do you do?" she asked, trying to keep her voice casual. "Civil rights law," Damon replied without looking up. "I represent employees who've been discriminated against by their employers. People who've been denied opportunities, harassed, or pushed out of their jobs because of their race, gender, or other protected characteristics." Victoria's champagne glass froze halfway to her lips. "That sounds contentious." "It can be, especially when we're dealing with companies that have deeply embedded cultures of bias, companies where discrimination isn't just individual prejudice, but institutional policy." Damon's eyes met hers across the aisle. "Companies where the leadership sets a tone that trickles down through every level of the organization." David Kim, who had been listening to the conversation while pretending to work on his laptop, suddenly looked up with recognition. He'd been trying to place where he'd heard the name Ashford recently, and now it clicked. "Wait," David said loud enough that several passengers could hear. "Ashford Technologies. That's the company that's been all over the tech news lately. The discrimination lawsuit." Victoria nearly choked on her champagne. "I don't know what you're talking about. It's been huge in Silicon Valley." David continued, his voice growing more animated. "A major class action case against one of the biggest tech companies on the East Coast. Hundreds of employees claiming racial bias in hiring and promotion. Internal emails, recorded meetings, the whole thing. Emma Richardson's live stream viewers were going crazy in the chat, with many of them now Googling Ashford Technologies' lawsuit and sharing links in real time. Her follower count was climbing rapidly as word spread about the drama unfolding on Christmas Eve at 35,000 feet. Michael Torres was now openly filming, having abandoned any pretense of subtle documentation. His filmmaker instincts told him he was witnessing something that would become significant, and he wasn't going to miss it due to false politeness. "The case is scheduled for emergency court proceedings tomorrow," Damon said quietly, his voice carrying clearly in the hushed cabin. "Christmas Day might be a holiday, but the British courts agreed to hear our motion for immediate injunctive relief." Victoria's hand was shaking now as she set down her champagne glass. You're the lawyer. I'm the lead counsel for the plaintiffs." "Yes." Damon's voice remained calm, professional. 217 current and former employees of Ashford Technologies, all of whom have experienced workplace discrimination under your husband's leadership. The cabin fell completely silent except for the steady hum of the engines. Even the flight attendants who had returned to their service duties paused to listen to the conversation that was transforming from personal conflict into legal drama. One of those plaintiffs, Damon continued, his voice taking on a slightly more personal tone, "is my sister, Keisha Rivers. She was one of your husband's top software engineers until she was pushed out for complaining about the hostile work environment." Victoria's face went pale beneath her expensive makeup. I don't know anything about the company's personnel decisions." "Don't you?" Damon pulled out a particular document from his file. "Because according to our discovery materials, you were present at several company social functions where employees were discussed, including a country club dinner where someone matching your description made comments about maintaining the company's cultural standards." The blood drained from Victoria's face entirely. She remembered that dinner, remembered the wine, remembered saying things that seemed funny at the time, but would sound horrific in a deposition. "You can't prove that," she whispered. "Actually, we have video," Damon replied matter-of-factly. "The country club has security cameras in the dining areas. Your comments about keeping the company free from urban influences were captured quite clearly." Emma's live stream had now attracted over 10,000 viewers, many of whom were recording the stream and sharing clips across social media. Had Christmas flight. Racism was already starting to trend as people shared the story in real time. Victoria looked around the cabin, desperately seeking escape or allies. But every face she saw reflected disgust, embarrassment, or fascination with the legal drama unfolding. She was trapped at 35,000 feet with the lawyer who was about to destroy her husband's empire, and she'd already said things that would likely become evidence. "This is harassment," she said weakly. "You're using this flight to intimidate me." Mrs. Ashford Damon said gently, "I didn't even know you were on this flight until you started questioning my right to be here. You initiated this conversation. You questioned my presence, my place, my belonging. I'm simply explaining why those attitudes are relevant to my professional work." He gestured to the files spread across his tray table. "Tomorrow morning, a British court will hear evidence about how your husband's company created and maintained a culture of exclusion, how qualified employees were denied opportunities because they didn't fit the cultural profile, how talent was wasted and lives were damaged because people like your husband believed that success belonged to certain types of people." Damon's voice remained calm, but there was steel underneath. "The irony, Mrs. Ashford, is that you've spent this entire flight demonstrating exactly the kind of mindset that led to this lawsuit. The belief that some people belong in first class and others don't. That comfort and respect are privileges reserved for people who look like you." Victoria was trembling now. Whether from alcohol, withdrawal, fear, or rage was impossible to tell. But everyone in the cabin could see that the confident socialite who had boarded the plane was crumbling before their eyes. The plane continued its climb through the Christmas night sky, carrying with it a confrontation that would soon capture international attention and change the lives of everyone on board. The first-class cabin had transformed from a luxury sanctuary into a pressure cooker of tension. As Flight 185 reached cruising altitude somewhere over the Atlantic Victoria, Ashford's carefully constructed mask of sophisticated civility was disintegrating with each passing mile. "I need another drink," Victoria announced loudly, pressing her call button repeatedly until Sophia approached with practiced patience. "What can I get for you, Mrs. Ashford? Something stronger than champagne?" "Vodka. Grey Goose if you have it, a double. Victoria's voice carried the edge of someone losing control but fighting to maintain authority through alcohol and attitude. Sophia hesitated. Victoria had already consumed 4 glasses of champagne and they were barely 2 hours into an 8-hour flight. Perhaps I could bring you some water first, and then I didn't ask for water. Victoria snapped her voice loud enough that passengers in business class were turning to look. I asked for vodka. I'm a first-class passenger, and I expect first-class service. Damon Rivers looked up from his legal documents, his expression thoughtful. He'd seen this pattern before in depositions and courtroom testimonies. When people felt cornered, they often doubled down on displays of power and privilege, using their status as a weapon against perceived threats. Of course, Mrs. Ashford Sophia replied diplomatically. I'll bring that right away. As Sophia walked toward the galley, Victoria's attention returned to Damon with renewed hostility. The alcohol had stripped away her subtle approach, leaving raw prejudice barely concealed beneath a veneer of righteous indignation. You know, Victoria said, her words slightly slurred, I've been thinking about our conversation, about your profession. She pronounced the word like it left a bad taste in her mouth. Ambulance chaser, basically. Making money off people's complaints. Damon set down his pen and gave Victoria his full attention. Is that how you see civil rights law, as ambulance chasing pleas? Everyone knows what you people do. You find disgruntled employees, fill their heads with ideas about discrimination, and convince them to sue instead of taking responsibility for their own failures. The phrase, you people hung in the air like poison gas. Several passengers shifted uncomfortably in their seats while others leaned forward with fascination and horror. Emma Richardson's live stream had now attracted over 25,000 viewers. The chat was moving too fast to follow, but the overall sentiment was clear. People were watching a racism masterclass unfold in real time. She'd started the stream as lighthearted travel content, but it had evolved into something much more significant. You people, Damon repeated quietly. That's an interesting phrase, Mrs. Ashford. Who exactly are my people in this context? Victoria's cheeks flushed red, whether from alcohol or the realization that she'd stepped over a line. Lawyers. I meant lawyers. Obviously. Did you? Damon's voice remained calm, but there was steel underneath. Because in my experience, when someone uses that phrase while staring at a black man, they're usually not talking about professional credentials. David Kim, who had been documenting the exchange on his laptop, looked up sharply. Actually, I've been recording this conversation. You want to know what she said? She said, you people, while pointing directly at you. The context was pretty clear. Victoria whirled on David with fury. You've been recording me. That's illegal. I didn't consent to being recorded. Actually, Michael Torres chimed in from his seat, gesturing to his camera equipment. We're on an aircraft in international airspace. Different privacy laws apply. Plus, you've been speaking loudly enough that everyone in first class has heard every word. There's no reasonable expectation of privacy. I'm a documentary filmmaker, he continued. I've been filming this entire flight as travel content. Your behavior is now part of that documentation. Victoria looked around the cabin with growing panic. She was surrounded by cameras, recording devices, and witnesses to every word she'd spoken. Her attempt to assert dominance was backfiring spectacularly. Sophia returned with the vodka, her discomfort obvious. Here's your drink, Mrs. Ashford. Victoria snatched the glass and took a large gulp, as if alcohol could somehow erase the last hour of her life. This is harassment, she declared. All of you are harassing me. Actually, said an elderly gentleman from seat 4A who had been quietly observing the drama. You've been the one doing the harassing, madam. I've been traveling first class for 30 years and I've never seen such appalling behavior from a passenger. His refined British accent carried the authority of old-world propriety, and his words seemed to hit Victoria harder than anything else that had been said. To be criticized by someone she would normally consider her social peer was devastating to her sense of status. I'm not harassing anyone," Victoria stammered. "I'm simply trying to enjoy my flight without being subjected to aggressive behavior from people who don't understand proper etiquette." "Aggressive behavior?" Damon's eyebrows rose slightly. "Mrs. Ashford, I've been sitting quietly reading legal documents. You initiated every interaction we've had. You questioned my right to be here, made comments about proper seating arrangements, and used language that multiple witnesses have identified as racially charged. How exactly have I been aggressive?" Victoria's mouth opened and closed as she searched for an answer that would justify her position. The vodka wasn't helping her cognitive function, and the growing audience of hostile faces wasn't making her feel any more confident. You're intimidating," she finally said. "Sitting there with all those legal papers talking about lawsuits. It feels like a threat. A threat to whom Damon asked. To you personally, or to the mindset of discrimination that my case is designed to address." Emma's viewer count had climbed to over 40,000 people. The live stream was being shared across multiple social media platforms, with clips already appearing on Twitter and TikTok. Hashtag Victoria Ashford was beginning to trend alongside hashtag Christmas flight racism. Victoria took another large gulp of vodka, her movements becoming more unsteady. "My husband is going to hear about this. He has connections, influence. You can't just attack people like us without consequences." "People like you," Damon repeated. "There's that phrase again. What makes you special, Mrs. Ashford? What protections do you think you have that other people don't?" "We're job creators," Victoria said, her voice rising with drunken indignation. "Richard's company employs thousands of people. We contribute to society. We shouldn't have to deal with troublemakers and complainers who want something for nothing." The cabin erupted in shocked murmurs. Victoria had just dismissed legitimate workplace discrimination complaints as wanting something for nothing while being recorded by multiple devices and broadcast live to tens of thousands of people. David Kim shook his head in disgust. "Lady, you're describing civil rights as wanting something for nothing. You realize how that sounds, right?" "I don't care how it sounds," Victoria snapped, abandoning any pretense of subtlety. "I'm tired of people playing the victim card every time they don't get what they want. Maybe if some people worked harder instead of complaining about fairness, they'd be more successful." The silence that followed was deafening. Even the flight attendants had stopped moving, frozen by the blatant racism that Victoria had just expressed to an audience of witnesses and cameras. Damon Rivers sat back in his seat, a slight smile playing at his lips. As a civil rights attorney, he'd spent years collecting evidence of discriminatory attitudes. But rarely had he encountered such a clear, unambiguous display of racial bias delivered voluntarily and recorded from multiple angles. "Mrs. Ashford," he said quietly, "you should know that everything you've said in the last hour is being recorded by multiple passengers. It's being live-streamed to thousands of viewers. And tomorrow, when I'm in court representing your husband's former employees, I'll be able to demonstrate exactly the kind of attitudes that created the hostile work environment they experienced." Victoria's face went white as the implications hit her alcohol-clouded brain. She looked around the cabin at the faces staring back at her, some disgusted, some fascinated, some pitying, but none of them friendly. You can't use this against my husband," she whispered. "This is personal. This isn't about the company." "Isn't it?" Damon asked. "Because you've just demonstrated that the discriminatory attitudes documented in our lawsuit aren't isolated incidents. They reflect a broader mindset, a culture that extends from corporate boardrooms into first-class cabins." He gestured to his legal files. "Every word you've spoken tonight supports our case that Ashford Technologies fostered an environment where certain people were deemed unworthy, where success was reserved for people like you, where complaints about discrimination were dismissed as wanting something for nothing. Victoria clutched her vodka glass like a lifeline, but there was no escape at 35,000 feet. She was trapped with her own words, her own prejudices, and her own spectacular lack of judgment. The plane continued its course toward London, carrying with it a story that would soon become international news. And the night was far from over. 3 hours into the flight, Victoria Ashford had progressed from champagne to vodka and was now demanding wine. Her movements had become increasingly unsteady, her voice louder and more slurred, and her inhibitions had completely evaporated along with any social graces she might have once possessed. "I want a proper wine," Victoria announced, waving her empty vodka glass in Sophia's direction. "Something expensive. I know you keep the good bottles for people who appreciate quality." Sophia approached with visible reluctance. The situation in first class had deteriorated beyond anything in her training manual. Victoria was clearly intoxicated, but airline policy required delicate handling of premium passengers, especially when their behavior hadn't crossed into legally actionable territory. "What type of wine would you prefer?" Mrs. Ashford Sophia asked diplomatically. "Red. Something French. Bordeaux. The 2015 Chateau Margaux, if you have it." Victoria's words came out in careful, overpronounced syllables, the speech pattern of someone fighting to appear sober. Sophia glanced nervously at Jessica, who was documenting every interaction for the inevitable incident report. Serving more alcohol to an already intoxicated passenger violated multiple protocols, but refusing could trigger an even more explosive confrontation. "I'll see what we have available," Sophia replied, hoping to buy time while she figured out how to handle the situation. Meanwhile, Damon Rivers continued working through his case files, seemingly oblivious to Victoria's escalating intoxication. But his calm exterior masked growing concern. He'd represented enough clients who'd been victims of alcohol-fueled racist attacks to recognize the warning signs. Victoria wasn't just drunk. She was building towards something dangerous. Emma Richardson's live stream had now attracted over 60,000 viewers. The chat was moving at lightning speed, with viewers sharing the stream across platforms and major news outlets beginning to pick up the story. Victoria Ashford and #ChristmasFlight racism were trending globally, and video clips were spreading across social media faster than wildfire. "This is insane," Emma whispered to her camera, trying to balance journalistic coverage with responsible broadcasting. "I've never seen anything like this. We're watching someone's reputation self-destruct in real time." Michael Torres was capturing everything from multiple angles, his filmmaker training telling him this footage would become historically significant. He'd covered protests and rallies, but never witnessed such an intimate display of privilege and prejudice unfolding in such a confined space. David Kim was frantically documenting the incident on his laptop, creating a minute-by-minute timeline with timestamps that could later be verified against the aircraft's flight data. His tech industry background had taught him the importance of creating comprehensive records when witnessing potential legal violations. Victoria stood up unsteadily, using the seat back for support, as Sophia returned with a bottle of expensive Bordeaux. Finally, proper service. She snatched the wine glass without thanking the flight attendant and immediately took a large gulp. The dark red wine stained her lips, giving her an almost vampiric appearance under the cabin's LED lighting. She swayed slightly as she stood, her designer dress wrinkled and her previously perfect hair beginning to show signs of dishevelment. "You know what I don't understand," Victoria announced to the cabin at large, her voice carrying clearly over the engine noise. She gestured broadly with her wine glass, the dark liquid sloshing dangerously close to the rim. "I don't understand why hard-working people like me and Richard have to deal with constant attacks from people who want to blame their failures on everyone else." Damon looked up from his documents, his expression carefully neutral. "Is that how you see workplace discrimination, Mrs. Ashford? As people blaming others for their failures?" "Absolutely." Victoria took another large swig of wine, her movements becoming more exaggerated. Personal responsibility is dead. Instead of working harder improving themselves or adapting to company culture, people file lawsuits. They claim racism or sexism or whatever excuse is trendy. She gestured toward Damon with her wine glass, the liquid swirling ominously. People like you make millions convincing minorities that they're victims instead of encouraging them to excel. The cabin was completely silent except for the hum of the engines. Even the flight attendants had stopped moving, watching with horror as Victoria dug herself deeper into a hole of her own making. People like me, Damon repeated slowly. You keep using that phrase, Mrs. Ashford. I'm curious about your definition. Victoria's face was flushed with alcohol and anger. Civil rights lawyers, race baiters, people who profit from division instead of encouraging unity and hard work. And what about people like your husband, Damon? Asked quietly. CEOs who create environments where talented employees are pushed out because they don't fit a particular demographic profile. My husband, Victoria said, swaying slightly as she pointed the wine glass at Damon, built his company from nothing. He deserves respect, not attacks from ungrateful employees who couldn't cut it. Emma's livestream viewers were going absolutely wild. The chat was filled with shocked reactions, angry responses, and people sharing the stream with increasingly urgent messages about the racism being broadcast live from a commercial aircraft. Couldn't cut it. David Kim's voice carried disbelief and anger. Lady, we're talking about engineers with advanced degrees from MIT and Stanford. These aren't people who couldn't cut it. These are people who were excluded despite their qualifications. Victoria whirled to face David wine sloshing in her glass. Oh, please. Everyone knows about diversity initiatives. Companies are forced to hire unqualified minorities to meet quotas. When they can't perform at the same level as naturally talented people, they cry discrimination. The words hit the cabin like a physical blow. Victoria had just expressed the most toxic stereotypes about affirmative action and minority achievement, demonstrating exactly the kind of thinking that Damon's lawsuit was designed to address. Naturally talented people, Damon said, his voice dangerously quiet. Meaning white people. I assume. Victoria's mouth opened and closed as she realized what she'd said. Even through her alcohol-clouded judgment, she understood she'd crossed a line. But pride and prejudice drove her forward instead of pulling her back. I didn't say that, she stammered. I said naturally talented. That could be anyone. But in the context of your husband's company, Damon pressed the naturally talented people seemed to be overwhelmingly white and male. Interesting coincidence. Victoria's face was now bright red with anger and embarrassment. She raised her wine glass to take another drink, but her hand was shaking with rage. The dark Bordeaux trembled in the glass like liquid fury. You're twisting my words, she accused, pointing at Damon with her free hand while holding the wine glass in the other. You're making me sound like something I'm not. I'm not making you sound like anything, Mrs. Ashford. I'm simply asking you to clarify your statements about natural talent and diversity hiring. Victoria's composure completely shattered. Years of suppressed racism encouraged by wealth and privilege exploded in a moment of alcohol-fueled rage. She stepped forward, moving into the aisle between their seats, wine glass raised like a weapon. I am sick and tired of people like you attacking people like me, she screamed, her voice echoing through the aircraft. We work hard, we contribute to society, and we deserve better than being lectured by... She gestured wildly with the wine glass, searching for words that would hurt without getting her arrested. But alcohol had destroyed her verbal filter, and the racism came pouring out uncensored. By what Mrs. Ashford Damon asked, his voice deadly calm, despite the proximity of an intoxicated hostile woman standing over him. By people who don't belong here. Victoria screamed, the wine glass shaking violently in her hand. People who get everything handed to them and then complain it's not enough. The aircraft hit a pocket of light turbulence at exactly that moment. The plane lurched slightly to the left, a minor bump that passengers barely noticed under normal circumstances. But Victoria Ashford was drunk, angry, off balance, and holding a full glass of red wine directly above Damon Rivers. Whether the turbulence caused the spill or simply provided convenient cover for a deliberate act would later be debated in courtrooms and comment sections. But the result was undeniable. The entire contents of Victoria's wine glass emptied directly onto Damon's head, shoulders, and laptop computer. The dark red Bordeaux soaked through his navy sweater, stained his legal documents, and dripped onto the aircraft floor like spilled blood. The expensive wine that Victoria had demanded so imperiously now covered the black lawyer she'd been attacking for hours. For a moment, the cabin was absolutely silent. Even the engine noise seemed muted as everyone processed what they'd just witnessed. Damon sat motionless, wine dripping from his hair down his face. His legal documents ruined, his computer potentially destroyed. Then Victoria's voice cut through the silence like a knife. "Oh my God, look what you made me do," she shrieked, not a trace of apology in her voice. "You startled me with all your aggressive questions. Now look at this mess." She looked around the cabin with wild eyes, seeking support for her narrative that she was somehow the victim of this incident. Did everyone see that he was being threatening and aggressive, and when the plane moved I spilled my drink? This is his fault. The passengers stared back at her in shocked silence. Multiple cameras had captured the incident from different angles. Emma's live stream had recorded everything in real time for over 60,000 viewers. The evidence was overwhelming and undeniable. But Victoria Ashford, drunk on wine and privilege, continued her performance. "I want him arrested," she declared, pointing at Damon with a wine-stained finger. "He threatened me, caused me to spill my drink, and now he's probably going to claim it was deliberate. This is exactly the kind of victim-playing behavior I was talking about." Damon Rivers sat in his wine-soaked seat, processing the moment with the analytical mind of an attorney who'd spent years documenting discrimination. He was covered in expensive wine. His computer was likely ruined. His legal documents were stained, and he was trapped at 35,000 feet with a racist woman who had just assaulted him while blaming him for the attack. But instead of anger or outrage, Damon felt something else: vindication. Victoria Ashford had just provided the most perfect demonstration of the attitudes and behaviors his lawsuit was designed to address. She'd attacked him, blamed him for her attack, and then demanded his arrest for being the victim of her assault. It was the ultimate expression of the racial privilege and victimhood reversal that characterized modern racism. And it had all been captured on video, live-streamed to thousands, and witnessed by an international audience. "Ladies and gentlemen," Captain Morrison's voice came over the intercom, oblivious to the drama unfolding in first class. "We're experiencing some light turbulence. Please return to your seats and ensure your seatbelts are fastened." As Damon Rivers sat dripping with wine, surrounded by ruined legal documents, facing a woman who had just assaulted him while claiming to be his victim, he realized that his case against Ashford Technologies had just gotten a lot stronger, and Victoria Ashford's Christmas was about to get much, much worse. The first-class cabin erupted into chaos as wine dripped from Damon's hair onto his ruined legal documents. Victoria Ashford stood swaying in the aisle, her empty wine glass clutched in her hand like evidence of her own victimization, her face a mask of indignant fury that defied all logic and human decency. "Security!" Victoria screamed at the top of her lungs, her voice carrying throughout the aircraft. "I need security immediately. This man threatened me and caused me to spill my drink." Sophia Ramirez rushed forward with towels, her face pale with shock at what she'd just witnessed. In 5 years of airline service, she'd never seen anything like this. "Mr. Rivers, I am so sorry. Let me help you with that. Don't apologize to him," Victoria shrieked, grabbing Sophia's arm. "He's the one who should be apologizing. He was being aggressive and intimidating, and when I tried to move away from him, the plane lurched and I spilled my wine. He caused this. Emma Richardson's live stream was exploding. Her viewer count had climbed past 85,000 people, and the chat was moving so fast it was impossible to read individual comments. But the overall sentiment was clear. People were watching in horror as Victoria attempted to gaslight an entire airplane full of witnesses. "This is unbelievable," Emma whispered to her camera, trying to maintain journalistic objectivity while witnessing what was clearly a racially motivated assault. She just poured wine on him and is now claiming he caused it. There are literally dozens of witnesses and multiple cameras that caught everything. Michael Torres was capturing the aftermath from multiple angles, his documentary filmmaker instincts telling him this would become one of the most important pieces of footage he'd ever shot. "This is going to be studied in sociology classes for decades," he muttered to himself while adjusting his camera settings. David Kim was furiously typing on his laptop, creating a real-time account of the incident, while also sharing clips on social media. His tech industry connections meant the story was spreading rapidly through professional networks, reaching people who had direct knowledge of the Ashford Technologies discrimination case. "Ma'am, please calm down," Jessica Collins said nervously, approaching Victoria with obvious reluctance. "We need to assess the situation and make sure everyone is okay." "I'm not calm," Victoria screamed. "I want the air marshal. I want this man arrested. He's been harassing me since takeoff, making me feel unsafe, and now he's going to blame me for an accident." She gestured wildly around the cabin wine glass, still in her hand, her designer dress now wrinkled and stained. Did anyone else see how threatening he was being? How he was interrogating me about my personal life? I felt scared. The elderly British gentleman in seat 4A stood up with obvious disgust. "Madame, I've been watching this entire interaction, and you are the only person on this aircraft who has behaved threateningly. That young man has been nothing but polite despite your appalling behavior." "You don't understand," Victoria said, desperately looking around for any allies in the cabin. "He's a lawyer. He's trying to sue my husband. He's using this flight to intimidate me and gather evidence." Damon Rivers finally spoke, his voice calm and measured, despite being covered in wine. "Mrs. Ashford, I've been sitting quietly in my assigned seat working on legal documents that are now ruined thanks to your assault." "Assault." Victoria's voice hit a pitch that could shatter glass. "I didn't assault anyone. It was an accident. You can't prove it was deliberate." "Actually," said Michael Torres, holding up his camera, "I've been filming this entire flight for a documentary. The footage shows you standing over him with a full wine glass, screaming about people who don't belong here right before you poured the wine on his head." Victoria's face went white. "You can't use that I didn't consent to being filmed." The footage also shows David Kim added reading from his laptop screen that you said, and I quote, "People who get everything handed to them and then complain it's not enough while gesturing at Mr. Rivers with the wine glass." Then you said, "By people who don't belong here, and that's when you dumped the wine." Emma's live-stream chat was now completely unreadable, moving at thousands of comments per second. Major news outlets were starting to pick up the story with verified accounts, sharing clips and asking for more information about the flight details. "I want to speak to the captain," Victoria demanded, her voice becoming shriller with each word. "This man is a threat to passenger safety. He's been stalking me, harassing me, trying to intimidate me about some made-up lawsuit against my husband's company." "Made-up lawsuit?" Damon's eyebrows rose slightly. "Mrs. Ashford, the case is scheduled for emergency proceedings tomorrow morning in London. Your husband's company is facing a $50 million judgment. It's hardly made up." Victoria stumbled backward, her alcohol-impaired balance making her movement unsteady. "You can't prove anything. My husband is a respected businessman. His company follows all employment laws." "Does it?" David Kim looked up from his laptop with grim satisfaction. "Because I just found the internal emails that were leaked last month. Want me to read some of your husband's comments about maintaining cultural standards and avoiding urban influence in hiring decisions?" The color drained from Victoria's face. Those emails were supposed to be confidential part of the legal discovery process. But in the age of social media, confidential information had a way of becoming public very quickly. Those emails are taken out of context, Victoria said weakly. Richard was talking about professional standards, not what you're implying. Professional standards like making sure employees fit a certain demographic profile, Damon asked quietly. Professional standards like questioning whether black employees really earned their degrees. Professional standards like joking about diversity quotas in company leadership meetings. Victoria looked around the cabin desperately. Every face staring back at her reflected disgust, disbelief, or fascination with her meltdown. There were no allies, no supporters, no one willing to validate her narrative of victimhood. This is a setup, she declared with sudden clarity, as if alcohol had somehow sharpened her paranoid thinking. You planned this whole thing. You booked the seat next to me deliberately. You've been recording everything trying to entrap me, Mrs. Ashford Damon said patiently. I was rebooked onto this flight 3 hours ago after my original flight was canceled due to weather. I had no idea you would be on board. You're the one who initiated every interaction we've had. But you knew who I was, Victoria accused. You recognized my name, because your husband's company is the subject of a major discrimination lawsuit that I'm handling. Your name came up in the discovery process when we investigated the culture of bias at Ashford Technologies. You were mentioned specifically in several depositions. Victoria's legs seemed to give out slightly. She grabbed the nearest seat back for support, her wine glass finally slipping from her fingers to shatter on the cabin floor. The sound of breaking glass seemed to punctuate the destruction of her composure. I want to go back to my seat, she whispered suddenly, looking very small and very drunk. Ma'am, Sophia said gently, I think it would be best if you remained standing while we assess this situation. We may need to move you to a different seat for the safety and comfort of other passengers. Move me? Victoria's voice rose again. I paid for first class. I have a right to my seat. You can't discriminate against me because of one little accident. The irony of Victoria claiming discrimination after spending hours expressing racist views was not lost on anyone in the cabin. Several passengers laughed bitterly at her sudden concern for equal treatment. Emma's follower count had now passed 100,000 people, and Hallard Victoria Ashford was trending #1 globally on multiple social media platforms. News outlets were scrambling to identify the flight and get statements from airlines and legal experts. Mrs. Ashford said the elderly British gentleman, his voice carrying decades of authority. You have disgraced yourself, your family, and every other passenger on this aircraft. Your behavior has been appalling, your language has been racist, and your assault on this gentleman was witnessed by dozens of people. It wasn't... Victoria stammered, but her denials were growing weaker as the weight of evidence mounted against her. Captain Morrison's voice came over the intercom. Ladies and gentlemen, this is your captain. We've been informed of a disturbance in the first-class cabin. We're currently coordinating with authorities on the ground to ensure appropriate measures are taken upon our arrival in London. Victoria's face went completely white. The captain's announcement meant the incident was being officially documented, that authorities were being notified that this wasn't going away when the plane landed. She was trapped at 35,000 feet with her own words, her own actions, and her own spectacular lack of judgment. And the night was far from over. The plane continued its course toward London, carrying with it a story that would dominate headlines, destroy reputations, and change lives forever. As Victoria Ashford stood swaying in the wine-splattered aisle, clutching a seat back for support, Damon Rivers calmly reached for his phone. Wine continued to drip from his hair as he dialed a number from his contacts, his movements deliberate and precise despite the chaos surrounding him. Sarah. It's Damon, he said quietly into the phone, his voice carrying clearly in the hushed cabin. I need you to expedite the emergency injunction filing. Yes, I know it's Christmas Eve. No, I'm still on the plane, but something's come up that's going to accelerate our timeline significantly. Victoria's alcohol-clouded brain struggled to process what she was hearing. Emergency injunction, expedited filing. The legal terms seemed ominous, connected to her husband's company in ways she couldn't quite grasp through the fog of wine and vodka. "What injunction?" Victoria demanded, her voice slurring slightly. "What are you talking about?" Damon held up a finger, continuing his phone conversation. "Pull the Ashford Technologies files immediately. We need to prepare for an emergency motion first thing in the morning. Yes, the company director's spouse has just provided us with additional evidence. Video evidence." Emma Richardson's live stream chat was exploding with viewers trying to piece together the legal implications of what they were witnessing. Over 120,000 people were now watching live as a major discrimination case played out in real time at 35,000 feet. David Kim was frantically Googling legal terms on his laptop, his tech industry background giving him insight into corporate legal battles. "Oh shit," he muttered loud enough for nearby passengers to hear. "An emergency injunction against a tech company on Christmas Day. That's massive." Victoria stumbled closer to Damon's seat, her coordination impaired but her curiosity overriding her caution. "What emergency injunction? What does this have to do with Richard's company?" Damon finished his call and looked up at Victoria with an expression of professional satisfaction. "Mrs. Ashford, thanks to your performance tonight, we're going to ask the court for an immediate freeze on Ashford Technologies' assets pending investigation into the company's discriminatory practices." "You can't do that," Victoria whispered, the legal implications beginning to penetrate her intoxicated state. "Richard's company. It's worth hundreds of millions." "Was worth hundreds of millions," Damon corrected. "But when the court sees the evidence of institutional bias, the video of racist behavior from a company director's spouse, and the pattern of discrimination we've documented, they may decide that Ashford Technologies poses a flight risk for assets." Michael Torres adjusted his camera angle to capture Victoria's face as the reality of the situation dawned on her. The confident socialite who had boarded the plane was being destroyed by her own prejudices and poor judgment. Company director's spouse. Victoria's voice was barely above a whisper. I don't have any official role." "Actually," said David Kim, reading from his laptop screen, "according to Delaware corporate filings, Victoria Ashford is listed as a director of Ashford Technologies Board. She also holds significant stock options and has signature authority on several corporate accounts." Victoria's legs nearly gave out completely. In her alcohol-fueled rage, she'd forgotten about her official role in Richard's company. What had seemed like a personal confrontation was actually a corporate officer making racist statements about the very lawsuit threatening her husband's business. I don't remember signing those papers," Victoria stammered. "Richard handles all the business stuff. Whether you remember or not," Damon said calmly, "you're legally responsible for your statements and actions as a corporate director. Everything you've said tonight about diversity hiring natural talent and people who don't belong places could be used as evidence of the company's discriminatory intent." Emma's viewer count hit 150,000 and was still climbing. News outlets were scrambling to verify the story, and legal experts were being pulled from Christmas Eve celebrations to provide commentary on the unprecedented situation. Sophia approached with a handful of towels, her expression mixing professional concern with personal horror at what she was witnessing. "Mr. Rivers, would you like us to escort you to a different section of the cabin? We have some available seats in business class where you could clean up." "Actually," Damon said, declining the towels, "I think I'll stay exactly where I am. This wine-stained sweater is evidence of assault, and I want it documented properly when we land." Victoria's face went ashen. "Assault. It was an accident. I told you the plane lurched." "Mrs. Ashford," said the elderly British gentleman, his voice cutting through her protests like a legal brief. "I've been flying for 40 years. That wasn't turbulence, and that wasn't an accident. You deliberately poured wine on this man while screaming racial epithets." "I didn't use any racial slurs," Victoria protested weakly. "You didn't need to," David Kim replied, still documenting everything on his laptop. Saying people don't belong here while attacking a black man is pretty clearly racially motivated. Plus, the whole conversation about natural talent and diversity hires was recorded by multiple people. Victoria looked around the cabin, desperately seeking any escape from the legal trap that was closing around her. But every face reflected the same judgment, the same disgust, the same recognition that they were witnessing something historically significant. "My husband is going to sue all of you," Victoria declared with drunken bravado. "Defamation, invasion of privacy, conspiracy. He has the best lawyers in New York." Damon smiled grimly. "Actually, Mrs. Ashford, your husband's lawyers are about to be very busy defending against our discrimination lawsuit. They probably won't have time for frivolous defamation claims." Frivolous. Victoria's voice rose to near shrieking levels. "You people have been attacking me all night." "There it is again," Michael Torres said, still filming. "You people. For someone who claims not to be racist, you sure use that phrase a lot when talking to people of color." Victoria realized her mistake immediately, but alcohol had destroyed her ability to navigate the conversation safely. Every word she spoke was digging her deeper into a hole that was being recorded, live-streamed, and shared across social media platforms. "I meant lawyers." "You lawyers," she stammered. "I wasn't talking about race." "Sure you weren't." David Kim said sarcastically. "Just like when you talked about maintaining proper atmosphere and questioning seating arrangements and natural talent versus diversity hires. None of that was about race either, right?" Emma's live stream was being reshared by verified accounts, now including several major news personalities and civil rights organizations. #Victoria Ashford was trending #1 globally, with millions of people sharing clips and commentary about the racist meltdown at 35,000 feet. Victoria's phone started buzzing with notifications. Through her alcohol-clouded vision, she could see her name trending on social media photos of herself being shared with increasingly hostile comments. The reality of going viral for all the wrong reasons was beginning to penetrate her consciousness. "Oh God," she whispered, staring at her phone screen. "It's everywhere. This is everywhere." "Yes, it is," Damon confirmed calmly. "Your racist tirade has been live-streamed to over 150,000 people. Video clips are being shared by millions more. And tomorrow morning, when I present our emergency motion to the British courts, this footage will demonstrate exactly the kind of discriminatory mindset that led to the hostile work environment at Ashford Technologies." Victoria slumped into the nearest empty seat, her designer dress wrinkled and wine-stained, her perfect hair disheveled, her reputation in ruins. "This can't be happening," she muttered to herself. "This is a nightmare." Actually, Damon said, checking his phone as new messages poured in. "This is justice. Your behavior tonight has provided the perfect demonstration of why our lawsuit exists. You've shown the world exactly the kind of attitudes that create hostile work environments for minority employees." Captain Morrison's voice crackled over the intercom again. "Ladies and gentlemen, we've been in contact with authorities on the ground. Upon arrival in London, certain passengers will be met by Metropolitan Police officers for questioning regarding an incident that occurred during flight." Victoria's face went completely white. Police involvement meant criminal charges, arrest records, international legal complications. What had started as a drunken confrontation with a passenger she didn't think belonged in first class had escalated into a legal nightmare that could destroy her life. The plane continued its inexorable course toward London, carrying with it a story that would change everything for everyone involved. And Victoria Ashford was beginning to realize that her Christmas was about to become the worst day of her life. The transformation of the first-class cabin from luxury sanctuary to courtroom drama reached its climax when David Kim's laptop chimed with an incoming video call. His face lit up with recognition as he saw the caller ID Rachel Martinez, tech journalist for The Verge. "David, thank God you answered." Rachel's voice carried urgency even through the aircraft's Wi-Fi connection. "We're getting reports that you're documenting the Ashford Technologies meltdown happening on Flight 185. Is this real? David positioned his laptop screen so the camera could capture both him and the wine-soaked aftermath behind him. It's real, Rachel. I'm documenting everything. The CEO's wife just assaulted the lead counsel in the discrimination case. Victoria Ashford, who had been slumped in defeat, suddenly jerked upright as she heard her name being discussed in what sounded like a media interview. You can't broadcast this, she slurred, stumbling toward David's seat. This is private, Mrs. Ashford. Rachel's voice came clearly through the laptop speakers. This is Rachel Martinez from The Verge. Can you comment on the allegations of discriminatory practices at your husband's company? Victoria's wine-flushed face appeared on camera as she leaned into David's screen. I don't have to comment on anything. This is harassment. You people are all ganging up on me. The irony of Victoria using the phrase "you people" while speaking directly to a Latina journalist was not lost on the growing online audience. Rachel's live stream was being simulcast across multiple platforms, reaching hundreds of thousands of viewers in real time. Mrs. Ashford, Rachel continued professionally, we have video footage of you making statements about natural talent versus diversity hiring, and witnesses report that you poured wine on the plaintiff's attorney. Can you explain your actions? It was an accident. Victoria screamed at the laptop camera. The plane moved. I was defending myself against his aggressive questioning. Emma Richardson, whose own live stream was now approaching 200,000 viewers, had been quiet during David's media call, but Victoria's continued denials pushed her to speak up. That's complete bullshit, Emma said clearly into her own camera while gesturing toward Victoria. I've been streaming this entire incident live. 60,000 people watched you deliberately pour wine on Mr. Rivers while screaming about people who don't belong in first class. Victoria whirled on Emma with fury. You've been what? How dare you broadcast me without permission? Actually, Michael Torres interjected, still filming everything you've been speaking loud enough for the entire aircraft to hear. There's no expectation of privacy when you're screaming racist comments in a public space. The cabin was now a hive of media activity. David's tech journalist contact, Emma's travel live stream, and Michael's documentary footage had turned Flight 185 into the most documented discrimination incident in aviation history. Damon Rivers, still sitting calmly in his wine-stained seat, received another phone call. This time, his expression grew more serious as he listened. That was my law partner, he announced to the cabin after ending the call. News outlets are already picking up the story. CNN wants a statement when we land. The Guardian is preparing an article about racism in corporate culture, and the ACLU is offering support for any additional legal action. Victoria's phone was now buzzing constantly with calls and notifications. Through her alcohol-clouded vision, she could see her name trending globally with millions of people sharing clips of her meltdown. Comments ranged from outraged to mocking, but none were supportive. This isn't fair, Victoria whimpered, slumping back into an empty seat. I'm not a racist. I have black friends. I donate to charity. This is being taken out of context. The elderly British gentleman let out a bark of bitter laughter. Madam, context is exactly what's being preserved here. Multiple cameras, dozens of witnesses, thousands of viewers. There's more context to this incident than most criminal trials. Sophia Ramirez, who had been quietly observing the media circus, finally stepped forward with airline protocol. Ladies and gentlemen, we need to prepare for our descent into London. Given the circumstances, we've been instructed to maintain current seating arrangements until we can coordinate with ground authorities. Ground authorities? Victoria's voice cracked. What ground authorities? Metropolitan Police, British Transport Police, and representatives from the Crown Prosecution Service, Sophia replied professionally. They'll want to interview everyone involved in the incident. David Kim's journalist contact was still live on his laptop. Rachel, can you explain the legal implications of this incident for our viewers? Rachel's voice carried the authority of someone who'd covered numerous tech industry scandals. This is unprecedented, David. We're watching real-time evidence gathering for what could become one of the largest discrimination settlements in tech history. Mrs. Ashford's behavior tonight demonstrates exactly the kind of institutional bias that Damon Rivers has been arguing exists at Ashford Technologies. Victoria tried to stand and leave the conversation, but her alcohol-impaired coordination and the aircraft's movement made walking difficult. She grabbed seatbacks for support, her designer dress now completely disheveled, her perfect hair falling in wine-stained strands. "I want to go to the bathroom," Victoria announced to no one in particular. "Ma'am," Jessica Collins said nervously, "given the incident and the ongoing documentation, we'd prefer if you remained in your seat area where we can ensure everyone's safety." "Safety?" Victoria laughed hysterically. "I'm the one who needs protection. I'm being attacked by lawyers and journalists and people with cameras." Emma looked directly into her live stream camera. For those just joining, we're watching Victoria Ashford, wife of tech CEO Richard Ashford, having a complete meltdown after pouring wine on the lawyer suing her husband's company for discrimination. She's now claiming to be the victim of the incident she initiated. Victoria's phone rang, and she answered it without checking the caller ID. "Richard." "Thank God I need Victoria." The voice was sharp, angry, clearly audible to nearby passengers. "What the hell is happening? I'm getting calls from reporters asking about some video of you on an airplane, Richard. It's not what it looks like." Victoria slurred into the phone. "There was this lawyer on the plane and he was asking about the company, and I may have said some things." "What kind of things, Victoria?" The entire first-class cabin could hear both sides of the conversation. Richard Ashford's voice carried the controlled fury of a CEO dealing with a public relations nightmare. I may have mentioned something about natural talent and diversity hiring." Victoria whispered, finally understanding the magnitude of her mistakes. The silence on the phone was deafening. When Richard finally spoke, his voice was ice cold. "Victoria, do you realize that you're a company director? That anything you say about hiring practices can be used against us in court?" "I forgot about the director thing," Victoria admitted, tears now streaming down her wine-stained face. "I was drunk and he kept pushing me and I just said things." "Jesus Christ, Victoria." Richard's voice carried despair now instead of anger. "My lawyers are telling me that video of you is trending globally. Millions of people have seen you make racist comments while assaulting our opposition counsel." Victoria looked around the cabin at all the cameras still filming her, all the passengers listening to her husband's reaction, all the evidence being gathered in real time. The reality of her situation was finally penetrating her alcohol-clouded mind. "Richard, you have to fix this," she begged into the phone. "Use your connections. Call your lawyer friends. Make this go away." Victoria Richards' voice was flat, defeated. "There's no making this go away. You've destroyed everything. The company, our reputation, our life. It's over." The phone line went dead. Victoria stared at her phone in shock, then looked around the cabin at all the faces staring back at her with mixtures of pity and disgust. For the first time since boarding the aircraft, Victoria Ashford was completely silent. The confident socialite who had questioned Damon Rivers's right to sit in first class was gone, replaced by a broken woman facing the consequences of her own prejudices. The plane continued its approach to London, carrying with it a story that would dominate headlines around the world and change the lives of everyone involved forever. The descent into London began with Captain Morrison's announcement that they were starting their initial approach into Heathrow. But in the first-class cabin, the real descent had been Victoria Ashford's spectacular fall from privilege to pariah, documented in real time for a global audience. Victoria sat hunched in her seat, her phone buzzing incessantly with calls she was afraid to answer. Her social media notifications had been silenced, but she could see the notification count climbing into the thousands. Her carefully curated life of luxury and status was disintegrating with each passing minute. Damon Rivers used the descent time productively coordinating with his legal team via text and email. His wine-stained sweater had dried into a burgundy testament to Victoria's assault, and he was documenting every aspect of the incident for the emergency court proceedings that would begin in just hours. Sarah's confirmed the emergency hearing, Damon announced to the cabin, knowing that Victoria was listening to every word. 9 a.m. London time. The judge agreed to an expedited process given the public nature of the incident and the evidence of institutional bias. Victoria looked up with desperate hope. Public nature. You can't use this in court. This was a private conversation between passengers. Emma Richardson laughed bitterly from her seat where her live stream was still broadcasting to over 250,000 viewers. Private lady, 250,000 people watched you pour wine on this man while making racist comments. This is the opposite of private. David Kim was coordinating with multiple news outlets, now his laptop screen filled with video call windows from journalists around the world. The story had gone global with major networks in the US, UK, and Europe, all scrambling to cover the unprecedented in-flight discrimination incident. This is David Kim reporting live from British Airways Flight 185, he said into his camera, his voice taking on the professional tone of a correspondent. I'm here with the passengers who witnessed what may be the most documented case of airline racism in history. He panned his camera around the cabin, capturing the wine stains on Damon's seat, the shattered glass still being cleaned up by flight attendants, and Victoria's disheveled appearance as she tried to hide from the lens. Mrs. Ashford called out, "Michael Torres still filming everything for his documentary. Would you like to make a statement for the record? This footage will likely be used in court proceedings." "I don't want to be filmed," Victoria mumbled, covering her face with her hands. "Please stop filming me." "You should have thought of that before you decided to perform your racist tirade for an audience," replied the elderly British gentleman. "Actions have consequences, madam, even at altitude." Victoria's phone rang again, and this time she recognized the number as her husband's attorney. She answered with trembling hands. "Mrs. Ashford, this is Jonathan Pierce from Pierce Bradley and Associates. I represent your husband's company." The lawyer's voice was clipped professional and clearly audible to nearby passengers. "I need to advise you that anything you say from this point forward could be used against Ashford Technologies in legal proceedings." "But I'm his wife," Victoria protested. "I have spousal privilege or something, right? Not when you are also a corporate director making statements about company policies," the lawyer replied grimly. "Mrs. Ashford, I'm going to be very clear. Stop talking to anyone about anything related to hiring discrimination or company culture. Immediately." Victoria looked around the cabin at all the cameras still recording all the passengers, still listening, all the evidence still being gathered. "It's too late for that," she whispered into the phone. "I already said everything." The lawyer's sigh was audible through the phone speaker. "Mrs. Ashford, my firm will no longer be able to represent you personally in this matter. Your interests and the company's interests are now in direct conflict. I recommend you retain independent counsel immediately." The call ended, leaving Victoria staring at her phone in shock. Her husband had hung up on her. His lawyers had abandoned her, and she was facing criminal charges in a foreign country with no legal representation. "Ladies and gentlemen," Captain Morrison announced, "we're beginning our final descent into London Heathrow. Local time is 6:47 a.m., and it's a chilly December 26th morning. Flight attendants, please prepare the cabin for landing. Boxing Day morning in London would mark the beginning of a new chapter in all their lives, but especially for Victoria Ashford, whose Christmas Eve had become a masterclass in how privilege and prejudice could destroy everything in a matter of hours. Sophia approached Damon with a clean towel and a bottle of water. "Mr. Rivers, the captain wanted me to inform you that there will be representatives from the Metropolitan Police waiting to take statements when we land. They'll also be documenting the evidence of the alleged assault." "Alleged." Victoria looked up sharply. "It was an accident. I keep telling everyone it was an accident," Ma'am Sophia replied diplomatically. That will be for the authorities to determine based on witness statements and video evidence. Emma's live stream chat was now moving at thousands of comments per second, with viewers from around the world expressing shock, anger, and fascination with the real-time documentation of the incident. Major news outlets were sharing her stream, and she'd gained over 100,000 new followers during the flight. "I can't believe this is my life now," Emma said to her camera. "I started this as a fun travel stream about flying first class at Christmas, and it's turned into documenting what might be the most important discrimination case in recent history." David Kim was fielding calls from producers at CNN, BBC, and other major networks, all wanting exclusive interviews when the plane landed. The story was becoming international news, with legal experts being asked to comment on the implications for corporate discrimination cases. This incident, said legal analyst Jennifer Walsh via David's laptop connection, represents a perfect storm of documented discrimination. "We have video evidence, multiple witnesses, real-time social media documentation, and a corporate director making explicitly biased statements about her company's hiring practices." Victoria tried one more time to control the narrative. "I want everyone to know that I'm not a racist," she announced loudly to the cabin. "I was drunk, I was provoked, and my words were taken out of context." The cabin erupted in bitter laughter. After hours of documented racist comments, assault, and attempts to blame the victim, Victoria's final denial seemed absurd to everyone listening. Mrs. Ashford Damon said quietly, speaking directly to her for the first time since the wine incident, "Racism isn't determined by your intentions. It's determined by your actions, your words, and your impact on others. Tonight you demonstrated exactly the kind of thinking that created the hostile work environment my clients experienced at your husband's company." He gestured to his ruined legal documents, now stained with wine, but still readable. "You've provided us with the perfect demonstration of how discrimination works in practice. Not through burning crosses or explicitly racist policies, but through assumptions about who belongs where, who deserves what, and whose comfort matters more." Victoria had no response. She sat in her wine-stained designer dress, her perfect hair disheveled, her reputation in ruins, facing criminal charges in a foreign country. The confident socialite who had boarded the plane, believing in her inherent superiority, was gone, replaced by a broken woman confronting the consequences of her own prejudices. The plane touched down at Heathrow Airport as the sun rose on Boxing Day morning. As they taxied to the gate, passengers could see police vehicles and news crews waiting on the tarmac. The story of Flight 185 was about to move from the aircraft to the world stage. Victoria Ashford's Christmas Eve had become a cautionary tale about privilege, prejudice, and the power of documentation in the digital age. And for Damon Rivers and his clients, it had become the strongest possible evidence for their case against institutional discrimination. The plane came to a stop at the gate, but the real journey was just beginning for everyone involved. The jet bridge connected to Flight 185 with a metallic thunk that seemed to seal Victoria Ashford's fate. Through the aircraft windows, passengers could see an unprecedented scene unfolding on the tarmac, Metropolitan Police vehicles, airport security units, news crews with satellite trucks, and what appeared to be legal representatives carrying briefcases and official documents. "Ladies and gentlemen," Captain Morrison announced, "please remain seated while we coordinate with ground authorities. Certain passengers will be escorted off the aircraft first for processing, followed by normal deplaning procedures." Victoria sat frozen in her seat, watching through the window as reporters set up cameras and police officers coordinated their approach. The reality of criminal charges in a foreign country was hitting her with sobering clarity, cutting through the last remnants of alcohol and denial. Mrs. Ashford Sophia approached with professional courtesy, masking personal distaste. "You'll be among the first passengers to disembark. The authorities are waiting to speak with you. I want to call the American Embassy." "Victoria," whispered her voice barely audible. "I'm an American citizen. I have rights." "You absolutely have rights," replied Detective Inspector Sarah Collins of the Metropolitan Police as she boarded the aircraft with two uniformed officers, including the right to remain silent, which I strongly suggest you exercise until you have legal representation. D.I. Collins was a veteran of 20 years with the Met specializing in hate crimes and public order offenses. She'd seen enough viral racism incidents to know how to handle the media attention while ensuring proper legal procedures. Mrs. Ashford, I'm arresting you on suspicion of racially aggravated assault, Collins announced clearly, her words carrying throughout the silent cabin. You do not have to say anything, but it may harm your defense if you do not mention when questioned something which you later rely on in court. The formal arrest was being captured by multiple cameras, as Victoria was helped to her feet by police officers. Her designer dress was wrinkled and wine-stained, her hair disheveled, her makeup smeared from tears and sleep deprivation. This is a mistake, Victoria said weakly as handcuffs were applied. It was an accident. I was provoked. Ma'am, D.I. Collins replied professionally. You can discuss your version of events with a solicitor. Right now, I need you to come with us quietly. As Victoria was escorted off the aircraft, the remaining passengers watched in stunned silence. Emma Richardson's live stream was capturing everything, her viewer count now approaching 300,000 people watching live as the consequences of racism played out in real time. I can't believe what I just witnessed, Emma said quietly to her camera. We've just watched someone destroy their entire life with prejudice and privilege in the span of 8 hours. Damon Rivers was approached by Detective Sergeant Michael Torres, no relation to the filmmaker who took detailed statements about the assault, while photographers documented his wine-stained clothing as evidence. Mr. Rivers, we'll need you to come to the station to provide a formal statement, D.S. Torres explained. But first, I understand you have legal proceedings scheduled for this morning emergency injunction hearing at 9 a.m. Damon confirmed checking his phone for messages from his legal team. The incident last night has provided additional evidence for our discrimination case. David Kim was coordinating with multiple news outlets, his documentation of the incident now being treated as crucial evidence by both police and media. This is the most comprehensively documented airline racism incident in history, he told the BBC reporter who had boarded to interview witnesses. Michael Torres, the filmmaker, was being interviewed by Sky News about his footage. As a documentary filmmaker, I've covered protests and rallies, but I've never seen such an intimate display of how racism manifests in everyday interactions, he explained. This wasn't a political event or a planned confrontation. This was pure, unfiltered prejudice exposed under pressure. The elderly British gentleman who introduced himself as Sir James Whitfield, a retired High Court judge, was providing legal context to reporters. In 40 years on the bench, I've rarely seen such clear evidence of discriminatory intent. Mrs. Ashford didn't just commit assault, she provided a masterclass in how institutional bias operates. As news crews interviewed passengers, the story was being covered live on major networks worldwide. Victoria Ashford and #Christmas flight. Racism were trending globally, with millions of people sharing clips and commentary about the incident. Outside the aircraft, Victoria was being processed by police while reporters shouted questions. She kept her head down, saying nothing, her silence a stark contrast to her hours of loud racism on the plane. Mrs. Ashford, do you have any comment on the discrimination lawsuit against your husband's company called a reporter from The Guardian? Mrs. Ashford, do you regret your statements about diversity hiring? Shouted a correspondent from CNN. Victoria said nothing, allowing herself to be led to a police vehicle while cameras captured every step of her walk of shame. Damon Rivers emerged from the aircraft to a very different reception. Civil rights advocates, legal professionals, and supporters applauded as he walked through the terminal. His wine-stained sweater had become a symbol of dignity under attack, and his calm handling of the incident had inspired millions of viewers worldwide. Mr. Rivers called a reporter from the BBC, "How do you feel about Mrs. Ashford's arrest?" Damon paused, considering his words carefully. I feel that justice is being served, not just for me, but for the hundreds of employees who have experienced discrimination at Ashford Technologies. Mrs. Ashford's behavior last night demonstrated exactly the kind of attitudes that created the hostile work environment my clients faced. Will this incident affect your legal case? Asked a CNN correspondent. It provides additional evidence of the discriminatory mindset that pervades Ashford Technologies' corporate culture, Damon replied. When a company director makes explicitly racist statements while assaulting the lawyer representing discrimination victims, it speaks to institutional bias, not individual prejudice. Emma Richardson was being interviewed by multiple outlets about her live-stream documentation. I never expected my travel content to become evidence in a major civil rights case, she told Sky News, but I'm glad I was able to provide real-time documentation of what happened. Too often these incidents become he-said-she-said disputes. This time we have video evidence. The impact was immediate and global. Ashford Technologies' stock price was plummeting in early trading, with major investors calling for emergency board meetings. Several corporate clients were already distancing themselves from the company, citing concerns about working with organizations associated with documented discrimination. Richard Ashford was facing a board revolt, with directors demanding his resignation and lawyers advising immediate settlement of the discrimination case to minimize further damage. The company that Victoria had tried to defend with her racist tirade was being destroyed by her own words. As Damon made his way to the emergency court hearing, he carried with him not just legal documents, but video evidence, witness statements, and the moral authority of someone who had maintained dignity while under racist attack. The case against Ashford Technologies had been strong before the flight. Now it was overwhelming. Victoria Ashford was taken to a London police station where she would spend Boxing Day morning in a cell contemplating how 8 hours of racism had destroyed her marriage, her reputation, and her future. The sun rose over London on December 26th, illuminating a city waking up to a story that would dominate headlines around the world. Flight 185 had landed, but the journey toward justice was just beginning. By 8 a.m. on Boxing Day morning, the Royal Courts of Justice on the Strand were buzzing with unprecedented activity for a holiday. Emergency sessions were rare enough, but a case involving viral racism, corporate discrimination, and international media attention was extraordinary, even by London legal standards. Damon Rivers arrived at the courthouse still wearing his wine-stained sweater, now documented as evidence of assault. The symbolism wasn't lost on the growing crowd of reporters, legal observers, and civil rights advocates gathering outside the imposing Gothic building. Mr. Rivers, how confident are you about today's emergency hearing? Called a journalist from the Times. I'm confident that justice will prevail, Damon replied, his voice carrying the quiet authority that had served him so well during the flight. The evidence speaks for itself. Inside the courthouse, the Honorable Justice Margaret Pemberton was reviewing the emergency filings that had been submitted during the night. At 62, Justice Pemberton was known for her sharp legal mind and intolerance for discrimination in any form. The case file before her contained not just traditional legal documents, but USB drives full of video evidence and social media documentation. This is highly irregular, Justice Pemberton's clerk observed, looking at the mountain of digital evidence. We have live stream footage, social media documentation, and witness statements submitted in real time from an aircraft. Irregular circumstances require irregular procedures, Justice Pemberton replied, studying the video clips on her computer screen. If the evidence is authentic, this may be one of the clearest cases of corporate discrimination I've seen in 30 years on the bench. At Ashford Technologies' corporate headquarters in Manhattan, chaos reigned. Richard Ashford was facing a boardroom revolt as directors watched viral clips of his wife's racist meltdown on repeat. Stock prices were collapsing. Corporate clients were canceling contracts, and employees were submitting resignation letters in solidarity with discrimination victims. Richard, you have to resign, declared board member Jonathan Hayes, his voice carrying the authority of major shareholders. Your wife has made the company radioactive. We can't survive this level of negative publicity. She doesn't represent company policy, Richard protested weakly, but his words sounded hollow even to himself. She's a corporate director, replied another board member, Lisa Parker. Her statements about natural talent and diversity hiring have exposed us to massive legal liability. Our insurance won't cover discrimination claims aggravated by documented racist behavior from corporate leadership. Meanwhile, at Charing Cross Police Station, Victoria Ashford was experiencing the harsh reality of criminal justice. The luxury and privilege that had insulated her for 42 years were meaningless in a police cell where she was just another suspect facing charges. "Mrs. Ashford, your solicitor is here," announced the custody officer, leading her to an interview room where a harried-looking lawyer waited with bad news. "Mrs. Ashford, I'm James Morrison from Morrison & Associates," the solicitor said grimly. "I've been retained by your family to represent you, but I need you to understand the severity of your situation." "Can't you just make this go away?" Victoria asked desperately. "Richard has connections, money influence. Mrs. Ashford, you committed assault while making racist statements in front of dozens of witnesses and thousands of online viewers. This isn't a private dispute that can be settled quietly. You're facing criminal charges in the UK, civil liability in the US, and your statements are being used as evidence in a major discrimination lawsuit." The solicitor pulled out his tablet, showing Victoria the viral footage of her own behavior. "I need you to watch this and understand how it appears to outside observers." Victoria watched herself pour wine on Damon Rivers while screaming about people who don't belong in first class. She saw her own face contorted with rage and prejudice, her words dripping with racial animosity, her complete lack of remorse for assaulting another passenger. "That's not who I am," Victoria whispered, tears streaming down her face. "Mrs. Ashford, this video has been viewed by millions of people. It's being analyzed by legal experts, civil rights advocates, and news organizations worldwide. Who you think you are doesn't matter anymore. What matters is what you chose to do in front of all those cameras." At the Royal Courts of Justice, the emergency hearing was beginning. Justice Pemberton had reviewed the evidence overnight and was prepared to address the unprecedented case before her. "This court is in session," announced the clerk. "The Honorable Justice Margaret Pemberton presiding. The matter of Rivers v. Ashford, Technology's emergency application for injunctive relief." Damon Rivers stood at the plaintiff's table, his wine-stained sweater serving as a visible reminder of the previous night's events. Across the courtroom, Ashford Technologies was represented by a team of expensive lawyers who looked increasingly uncomfortable as the morning progressed. "Your Honor," Damon began, his voice carrying clearly through the packed courtroom, "we are seeking immediate injunctive relief to prevent further discrimination at Ashford Technologies, along with asset preservation orders to ensure our clients receive appropriate compensation for years of documented bias." Mr. Rivers, Justice Pemberton interrupted before we proceed with standard legal arguments. "I want to address the elephant in the room. I've reviewed the video evidence from last night's incident. Are you alleging that Mrs. Ashford's behavior demonstrates the discriminatory culture at her husband's company?" "Yes, Your Honor. Mrs. Victoria Ashford is not just the CEO's spouse. She's a corporate director with signature authority and policy influence. Her statements about natural talent versus diversity, hiring her assumptions about who belongs in first-class accommodations, and her violent reaction to being questioned about discrimination all reflect the institutional bias documented in our case." The defense team looked stricken. They'd hoped to argue that Victoria's behavior was personal and unrelated to corporate policy, but her official role as a director made that defense impossible. "Your Honor, the lead defense counsel attempted Mrs. Ashford's regrettable personal conduct should not be used to prejudice our client's rights in this employment dispute." Justice Pemberton's expression was stern. "Counsel, when a corporate director commits assault, while making explicitly discriminatory statements about the very lawsuit your client is defending, it goes beyond personal conduct. It demonstrates institutional culture. She turned to address the packed courtroom. Based on the evidence presented, including the unprecedented real-time documentation of discriminatory behavior by corporate leadership, this court grants the plaintiff's motion for immediate injunctive relief. The courtroom erupted in cheers from civil rights advocates, while Ashford's legal team sat in stunned silence. Furthermore, Justice Pemberton continued this court orders the immediate preservation of all Ashford Technologies assets pending full investigation into the discrimination claims. The behavior documented last night suggests a pattern of bias that may have affected hundreds of employees. Within hours, the ruling was being covered by news outlets worldwide. Ashford Technologies' stock price collapsed completely. Trading was suspended, and the company faced potential bankruptcy. Richard Ashford's empire, built over decades, was crumbling because of his wife's 8 hours of documented racism. Victoria Ashford remained in police custody, facing charges that could result in years in prison. Her arrest had been broadcast live to millions. Her racist statements were being studied in law schools, and her name had become synonymous with privilege-fueled prejudice. The emergency hearing concluded with Justice Pemberton's historic observation. This case demonstrates how modern technology can serve justice by documenting discrimination in real time. The court hopes this precedent will deter others from believing they can act with impunity simply because of their wealth or position. As news of the ruling spread, Damon Rivers stood outside the courthouse facing a crowd of supporters and media. The quiet dignity he'd maintained throughout Victoria's assault had made him a global symbol of grace under pressure. Today's ruling isn't just about one case or one company, he told the assembled crowd. It's about establishing that discrimination has consequences regardless of who commits it or how much money they have. The sun set on Boxing Day with Victoria Ashford in jail, her husband's company in ruins, and a precedent established that would change corporate accountability forever. Justice had been served, documented in real time, and broadcast to the world. 3 months after Christmas Eve on Flight 185, the final settlement hearing took place in the same Royal Courts of Justice, where the emergency injunction had been granted. The case had become a landmark in employment law, corporate accountability, and the power of social media documentation in fighting discrimination. Damon Rivers entered the courthouse wearing a new navy sweater, but he carried with him the wine-stained garment that had become an iconic symbol of dignity under attack. The sweater was now part of the permanent evidence file, its burgundy stains serving as a lasting reminder of how privilege and prejudice had collided at 35,000 feet. The courtroom was packed with representatives from civil rights organizations, legal scholars, and international media. The case had attracted attention from around the world, with law schools analyzing the precedent and corporations scrambling to review their own diversity policies. "All rise for the Honorable Justice Margaret Pemberton," announced the clerk. Justice Pemberton had spent months reviewing the evidence, including hundreds of hours of video documentation, thousands of social media posts, and detailed investigations into Ashford Technologies' employment practices. What emerged was a picture of institutional bias so comprehensive that it shocked even experienced employment lawyers. This court has concluded its review of Rivers v. Ashford Technologies. Justice Pemberton began her voice carrying the weight of legal history. The evidence presented demonstrates one of the most thoroughly documented cases of workplace discrimination in modern legal history. She gestured to the evidence files, which now included not just traditional employment records, but terabytes of digital documentation. The incident aboard Flight 185 provided unprecedented insight into the mindset that created and sustained discriminatory practices at Ashford Technologies. In the defendants section, a skeleton crew of lawyers represented what remained of the company. Richard Ashford was notably absent, having resigned in disgrace and relocated to a non-extradition country to avoid criminal fraud charges related to covering up discrimination complaints. The court finds that the discriminatory culture at Ashford Technologies was not limited to hiring practices. Justice Pemberton continued. Evidence shows that promotion decisions, work assignments, performance evaluations, and termination procedures all reflected patterns of racial and gender bias. Damon's sister Keisha sat in the gallery representing the 217 current and former employees who had joined the class action lawsuit. What started as her individual complaint about workplace harassment had grown into one of the largest discrimination settlements in corporate history. The video documentation from Flight 185 Justice Pemberton revealed that Mrs. Victoria Ashford, as a corporate director, held explicit biases about natural talent versus diversity hiring. Her statements about maintaining proper atmosphere and ensuring that people stay in their place reflected institutional attitudes that pervaded company culture. Emma Richardson was in the courtroom, no longer just a travel blogger, but now a documentary filmmaker, whose work was being used to train airline staff in recognizing and responding to discrimination. Her live stream footage had become required viewing in civil rights law courses worldwide. Mrs. Ashford's assault on Mr. Rivers, the judge continued, was not an isolated incident of personal prejudice. It was the violent expression of discriminatory attitudes that had been implemented in corporate policy for years. Michael Torres sat with his completed documentary, 35,000 Feet of Justice, which had premiered at Sundance and won awards for its real-time documentation of racism and its consequences. The film had been acquired by Netflix and was being used in diversity training programs across multiple industries. The court therefore orders Ashford Technologies to pay compensatory damages of £50 million to the affected employees, Justice Pemberton announced. Additionally, punitive damages of £25 million will be paid to establish a foundation for workplace equality education. The courtroom erupted in applause from civil rights advocates. The settlement was one of the largest in British legal history, but more importantly, it established precedents that would protect workers worldwide. David Kim was now working as a tech industry consultant, helping companies identify and eliminate biased algorithms in hiring and promotion procedures. His real-time documentation of the Flight 185 incident had made him a leading expert on digital evidence in discrimination cases. Furthermore, Justice Pemberton continued this court order's the creation of the Victoria Ashford Memorial Foundation for Workplace Dignity, to be funded by the defendants and dedicated to preventing the kind of institutional bias documented in this case. The irony of naming an anti-discrimination foundation after Victoria herself was not lost on anyone in the courtroom. Victoria Ashford's racist tirade had become the catalyst for one of the most comprehensive workplace equality initiatives in corporate history. Victoria herself was not present for the settlement hearing. She was serving an 18-month sentence in a British prison for racially aggravated assault, followed by deportation to the United States, where she faced additional charges for her role in covering up discrimination at her husband's company. Her marriage to Richard had ended in a spectacular divorce that made international headlines. Their assets had been frozen and distributed among discrimination victims, leaving both of them bankrupt and disgraced. The couple who had once moved in circles of wealth and privilege were now symbols of how racism destroys everything it touches. This case establishes several important precedents, Justice Pemberton explained to the packed courtroom. First, that corporate directors can be held personally liable for discrimination when they express biased views that influence company culture. Second, that social media documentation can serve as valid evidence in employment disputes. Third, that assault motivated by racial bias carries enhanced penalties under British hate crime legislation. Sophia Ramirez was in the courtroom representing airline workers who had been trained in new protocols for handling discrimination incidents. The case had led to industry-wide changes in how airlines respond to bias-motivated conflicts with staff, now required to document incidents and protect victims rather than prioritizing passenger comfort. The court hopes Justice Pemberton concluded that this case will serve as a deterrent to those who believe wealth and position insulate them from consequences. Mrs. Ashford's behavior aboard Flight 185 demonstrated that privilege cannot protect those who choose prejudice over human dignity. As the hearing concluded, Damon Rivers was surrounded by the clients whose courage had made the case possible. Keisha hugged her brother, tears streaming down her face, as she realized that her decision to speak up about workplace discrimination had led to justice for hundreds of others. This isn't just about money, Damon told the assembled media outside the courthouse. This is about establishing that discrimination has consequences regardless of who commits it or how much power they think they have. The settlement funds were distributed among the 217 affected employees, with amounts ranging from $50,000 to $500,000, depending on the severity and duration of discrimination they had experienced. But beyond the financial compensation, the case had created lasting change in how corporations approach diversity and inclusion. The Ashford Technologies building in Manhattan was sold to pay settlement costs, with the proceeds funding scholarships for underrepresented students pursuing careers in technology. The company itself ceased to exist, its remaining assets distributed among former employees who had been pushed out due to discrimination. The case had ripple effects throughout the tech industry and beyond. Companies scrambled to audit their own practices, eliminate biased policies, and ensure that their leadership understood the legal and financial consequences of discrimination. The Flight 185 standard became shorthand for comprehensive documentation and accountability in workplace bias cases. As news of the settlement spread worldwide, it became clear that 8 hours of documented racism had changed more than just the lives of those involved. It had established new legal precedents, created new standards for corporate accountability, and demonstrated the power of ordinary people to document injustice and demand change. Victoria Ashford's Christmas Eve had become a cautionary tale about the cost of prejudice, but it had also become a story of hope about the possibility of justice in the digital age. The wine-stained sweater that symbolized the case was donated to the Smithsonian Museum of African American History and Culture, where it joined other artifacts documenting the ongoing struggle for civil rights in America and around the world. Justice had been served, documented, and preserved for future generations to study and remember. 6 months after that fateful Christmas Eve flight, Damon Rivers stood in the departure lounge at JFK Airport, preparing to board another British Airways flight to London. This time, he wasn't carrying legal documents about discrimination cases. He was carrying an invitation to speak at the International Conference on Workplace Equality, where his experience would help shape policies protecting workers worldwide. The lounge was quieter than it had been that snowy December night, but the memories remained vivid. As Damon settled into his first-class seat, 2B, the same seat where he'd been covered in wine 6 months earlier, he reflected on how profoundly that night had changed not just his life, but the lives of everyone involved. His phone buzzed with a text from Keisha, who was now running her own successful software consultancy with funds from the settlement. "Safe travels, big brother. Proud of everything you've accomplished. Mom and Dad would be so proud, too." Their parents had passed away years earlier, but Damon often wondered what they would have thought about seeing their son become an international symbol of dignity under pressure. They'd raised him to believe that how you respond to injustice matters more than the injustice itself. Emma Richardson was now a successful documentary filmmaker, her work focusing on social justice issues around the world. Her footage from Flight 185 had become required viewing in journalism schools, demonstrating the power of citizen journalism in documenting discrimination. She'd used her newfound platform to highlight stories of everyday people standing up to bias and prejudice. "Mr. Rivers." A familiar voice interrupted his thoughts. Sophia Ramirez approached with a warm smile, wearing the uniform of British Airways senior cabin crew. "I wanted to thank you personally for how you handled that night. Your grace under pressure taught all of us something important about dignity." Sophia had been promoted to chief purser and was now leading airline-wide training on recognizing and responding to discrimination. The incident had transformed her from a nervous flight attendant into a confident advocate for passenger safety and equality. "You were brave that night, too," Damon replied. "Standing up for what's right when you could have stayed silent. That matters." Michael Torres had used his documentary footage to create 35,000 Feet, a study in modern racism, which had become a powerful educational tool. The film was being used in diversity training programs across multiple industries, helping people recognize how bias manifests in everyday interactions. David Kim had left his tech job to become a full-time consultant on digital documentation of discrimination. His work helped employees understand their rights to record workplace bias and taught companies how to create transparent, accountable environments. Even the elderly British gentleman Sir James Whitfield had become involved, establishing a legal fund to help discrimination victims access quality representation regardless of their economic status. As the plane prepared for takeoff, Damon thought about Victoria Ashford. She'd been released from British prison after serving 14 months and deported to the United States, where she faced additional charges. Her life of privilege had been completely destroyed, but perhaps there was still time for reflection and growth. He'd received a letter from her attorney 6 weeks earlier. Victoria wanted to make amends somehow, to use her experience to educate others about the destructive power of prejudice. Damon hadn't responded yet, but he was considering the possibility. Justice sometimes meant punishment, but it also meant the opportunity for redemption. Richard Ashford had fled to Brazil, where he lived in exile, his business empire reduced to nothing. Their assets had been distributed among discrimination victims, but money couldn't undo years of damaged careers and shattered dreams. Still, the accountability was important. It sent a message that actions have consequences regardless of wealth or position. The plane lifted off from JFK, climbing through clear skies toward London. This time there was no snow, no delays, no tension in the cabin, just the quiet hum of engines carrying passengers toward their destinations. Damon opened his laptop and began reviewing his speech for the conference. He planned to talk about the importance of documentation, the power of witnesses, and the courage required to speak truth to power. But mostly he wanted to emphasize that justice isn't about revenge. It's about creating procedures that protect everyone's dignity. "Excuse me, Mr. Rivers." A young woman approached his seat hesitantly. "I'm Sarah Mitchell. I'm a law student at Oxford, and I've been studying your case. I just wanted to say thank you for showing us how to stand up to discrimination with grace." "Thank you," Damon replied warmly. "But remember, the real heroes were the witnesses who spoke up and documented what happened. Change happens when ordinary people refuse to stay silent." As the plane crossed the Atlantic, Damon received messages from around the world. Former Ashford Technologies employees sharing updates about their new careers. Law students studying the case precedents. Activists using the documentation techniques pioneered during Flight 185 to expose bias in their own communities. The wine-stained sweater that had become a symbol of the case was now displayed in the Smithsonian, where schoolchildren learned about the ongoing struggle for civil rights. But the real legacy lived in the changed policies that protected workers and the cultural shift that made discrimination more difficult to hide. When the plane landed at Heathrow, there were no police vehicles, no media crews, no chaos. Just the ordinary process of international travel made slightly better by the precedents established 6 months earlier. Damon walked through the terminal where Victoria Ashford had been arrested, remembering how justice had finally caught up with prejudice. The airport looked the same, but the world had changed. Corporate policies had been rewritten. Legal precedents had been established. Training programs had been implemented. Most importantly, people had learned that discrimination thrives in silence, but withers under scrutiny. The cameras and live streams that documented Flight 185 had become tools of accountability, making it harder for bias to hide in plain sight. As Damon collected his luggage, he thought about the conference he would address the next morning. Hundreds of legal professionals, human resources experts, and equality advocates would gather to learn from the case that had started with racist assumptions about who belonged in first class. His message would be simple: Dignity is not determined by skin color, bank account, or social position. It's determined by how we treat each other when we think no one is watching. And in the digital age, someone is always watching. Someone is always documenting. Someone is always ready to speak up for what's right. The taxi ride through London took him past the Royal Courts of Justice, where history had been made and precedents established. The building looked the same as it had 6 months earlier, but the law inside had evolved to better protect workers from discrimination. That night, as Damon prepared his final remarks for the conference, he reflected on how 8 hours of documented racism had created lasting change. Victoria Ashford's prejudice had been ugly and destructive, but the response to it had been beautiful and transformative. Sometimes justice comes not in spite of injustice, but because of it. Sometimes the worst examples of human behavior inspire the best responses. And sometimes a flight that was supposed to be routine becomes the catalyst for change that protects millions of people worldwide. Tomorrow, Damon would share this story with advocates from around the world, helping to ensure that the lessons learned at 35,000 feet would continue to protect dignity and equality for generations to come. Flight 185 had become more than transportation. It had become transformation. The courage to document injustice, speak truth to power, and maintain dignity under attack had changed laws, policies, and lives around the world. Victoria Ashford's 8 hours of racism had indeed destroyed everything she'd tried to protect. But they had also created something beautiful, a world where discrimination was harder to hide, and justice was easier to find. Sometimes the most powerful changes begin with the simplest acts, refusing to stay silent, picking up a camera, and insisting that everyone deserves respect, regardless of where they sit or what they look like. The plane had landed, but the journey toward justice continues. If you believe this story moved you, then I need you to do something important right now. Hit that like button if you think everyone deserves to be treated with dignity, regardless of their skin color or background. Your support means the world to me and helps this message reach more people who need to hear it. Subscribe to this channel if you want to see more stories about justice, courage, and people standing up for what's right. We share these stories because they matter, because they change hearts and minds, and because they show us that ordinary people can make extraordinary differences. And please share this video with someone who needs to hear it today. Maybe it's a friend who's faced discrimination. Maybe it's someone who needs to understand why equality matters. Or maybe it's just someone who believes in the power of standing up for what's right. Remember, change doesn't happen when we stay silent. It happens when we speak up, when we document injustice, and when we refuse to let prejudice win. Your voice matters, your actions count, and your courage to do the right thing can literally change the world. Thank you for watching. Thank you for caring. And thank you for being part of a community that believes everyone deserves respect. I'll see you in the next story, where we'll continue to share tales of justice, dignity, and the incredible power of human courage. Until next time, stay brave, stand up for others, and never forget that sometimes the most important battles are fought not with weapons, but with character, grace, and an unwavering commitment to what's right.